Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. I'm here with Brian Goffberg. As ever, we are the team with the theme, and today's theme is chronographs. Recall that everything you see here is for sale. Reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details, or, if you like, sell us a watch or an entire collection. We are paying the highest prices since our founding in 2017.
The Ruthenium Chrono, by the way, is only available in the set.
How'd you know I was going to ask? Why don't we start with the Ruthenium Chrono?
Okay, so here we have a very special FP Journe. And so this is the François-Paul Journe Ruthenium Chronograph. It is from the vaunted Ruthenium series, platinum case, 40 millimeters, Ruthenium coated brass movement. They were at the time, the only 40 millimeter cased brass movement pieces. You have a varnished Ruthenium dial, absolutely stunning. It is a modular flyback chrono. So it's got a 5-day power reserve. And for François-Paul Journe, it was the first chronograph that he had made, and it is also the first chronograph that he made with a date since he came out with the split. So fabulous watch, and as I said, we actually have a set of all of these pieces, and this watch is only available if you were to purchase the whole set. But for me, it was a way to show off an exceptional chronograph with a little bit of history.
It's got a really cool grayscale aesthetic. The thing I love about this watch is, in spite of the fact that it's basically a bunch of whites, grays, and silver tones, somehow it has this luminous sort of life of its own. It seems to have an animus inherent to that dial because of the varnish you mentioned. It has a glossy glow that you wouldn't expect on the generally matte ruthenium coated material. Now, the watch is large for an early Journe at 40 millimeters, and it feels substantial. There's a lot to love about this watch. First, it is part of the Ruthenium series, and we do have every single example of the Ruthenium series. So what Brian meant to say is that this watch is part of that set. We have the full set, and the watch will only be sold with the set. So if you're a high roller into early, vintage, and special FP Journe pieces, this is definitely up your alley. The watch is advertised to run for 5, but FP Journe has said that is the chronometric power reserve of the watch. It will, in fact, run for 7. I should have wound it before showing you, but another fun feature of this watch is, in addition to the date, which is super practical, fun, and with its own ruthenium coat nicely toned, it's also a flyback chronograph. So this timepiece has a lot of functionality. It's a gloriously enjoyable piece. My favorite part is probably the use of a 60-minute chronograph minutes register, something you hardly ever see. FP Journe always one for attention to detail.
And you know, it's funny that you say that, because one of the other features of the watch that I think exemplifies that attention to detail is that the date wheel matches the dial. And you see a lot of manufacturers now simply just doing and it's actually 2 discs there. It's not one, so it's a larger date window, but they match the dial. And to me, that's something really special. And as you said, it's an attention to detail that very often nowadays is either not done at all or it's not done well.
Remember, if you bought a Royal Oak back in the early 2000s when this watch was made, it would have had a clashing date disc on anything but the silver dial. So don't think every brand gets that. They don't always. All right. Let's do one in yellow gold, and I've brought 2, so I'm going to pick favorites. I'm in love with this Scuderia Ferrari 70th anniversary Rattrapante Foudroyante from Girard-Perregaux. Brian, I know you love this watch, so I'm going to give the call to you for this one.
In terms of what? Just my thoughts on the watch?
Yeah, tell me why you love it. This thing is absolutely extravagant in a way you rarely see on GP watches. They tend to be a little bit more muted, whereas this almost feels like something Patek Philippe could have made, at least from a dial standpoint.
So, you know, when we took this watch in, you know, my first thought on the watch was, you know, you're getting a Foudroyante split-second chronograph for an exceptionally low price. So when you look at what other brands would charge for similar watches or similar complications, it honestly really doesn't even make sense. And as far as the color scheme goes, I'm a big fan of the gold with that black dial. It's similar in color scheme to a different variation of another watch that we have on the table that I will definitely show off. But to me, you know, GP had a relationship with Ferrari that then transitioned out. Was Hublot the next beneficiary of that, or did it go to Panerai next?
It was at Panerai, unfortunately, next. Although there was also a Cabistan that was really cool, but we'll never see that watch, so we don't need to talk about it.
So I would explain a little bit about what a Foudroyante is for those that don't know.
Yeah, the Lightning Seconds Hand. This is a movement that was jointly developed between Girard-Perregaux, Panerai, and Graham back in the day. So an interesting movement based on a 7750. It was modified by Le Jouperret back when they were called Jacquet. So you have the lightning seconds hand. It beats at 8 beats per second, and so you have 8 jumps of the seconds hand per second. You have a split-second chronograph, which was the other primary modification here, and the split-second trigger is coaxial with the crown. Now, what I love about this watch is that it's remarkably wearable. Although the dial screams baby 5070, the watch is actually 2 millimeters smaller than the 5070, so on the wrist at 40 millimeters, this watch wears very nicely. It's anything but overpowering in size, and I think that's good for a yellow gold watch, because yellow gold has a lot of power. It's a very lush, extravagant material, and too much sometimes is quite enough. This is a perfect balance because you have the dark of the black gloss dial, the applique yellow gold Arabic numerals, and then the yellow gold the case with extraordinary case lines. You can see how broad, flowing, and full those lugs are. You can do that with lugs when the case isn't oversized. If the case is huge on a watch, you have to curb the lugs so it'll fit a person. This is the advantage of doing a moderately sized watch. Now, it's also a fun piece because Luigi Macaluso of Girard-Perregaux, in addition to being an Italian, was also a championship-winning race car driver, and he was the president of the Italian Karting Association, and, of course, he owned Girard-Perregaux after the early 90s. So along with Luca Montezemolo of Ferrari, they had a long-term co-branding agreement where Girard-Perregaux would create Ferrari-branded watches. And this one, launched in 1999, was a commemoration of Scuderia Ferrari. So while the first Ferrari road car was made in 1947, the Scuderia, the racing team, which was at the time the factory Alfa Romeo racing team, Enzo created that in the 20s, and he campaigned other people's cars until the late 40s when he founded Ferrari Automobiles. And that's why this is 1929 to 1999 and not 1947. It's also a limited edition, 250 pieces, an extraordinary watch, automatic winding. And again, if you want that Patek 5070J look, but for less than $30,000, this is the way to go.
I'm not even joking. I think that if I had had all of that written on a script, that I couldn't even have read it as well as you just said it.
Well, that's why you pay me the big bucks.
that is true.
Let's see a real 5070 now.
But you know, one of the other features about this watch that differentiates itself from the 5070 is the gray of the dial, where there's a sort of a matte gray there in the subdials and then around the circumference of the dial that differentiates it from the center dial itself. So I think that adds a layer of difference between this watch and the 5070. It makes this watch a little bit sportier. They made this watch on a bracelet, and I think that when you hold this watch against the 5070 that you'll see on the table or that is on the table, you'll notice that difference. So why don't we hold them up next to each other? So here we have a Patek 5070 Rose. So, not the yellow, but, again, they did this in yellow gold with a black dial. Column wheel, lateral clutch chrono. Lemania-based movement. So it's a Lemania-based movement that Patek Philippe did then take and alter for their own purposes. But again, it's one of the most prolific and famous chronograph movements of all time. You had a Lemania chrono in this watch. Vacheron has used it. Many brands have used it over time. And the 5070 is probably one of their most well-regarded and famous watches that I would say is like a modern vintage piece. They made it in all 4 metals, different dial variations. And again, it's an exquisite, oversized Patek that you rarely see, coming in at 42 millimeters.
Yeah, back when this watch came out at Baselworld 1998, it was considered to be absolutely enormous. At 42 millimeters, it was enormous, both for its time and for its brand, Patek. But it's aged well. Because of its size, it's a broad, saucer-shaped watch that fills the wrist nicely and still looks contemporary in 2020. Of course, this is the rose gold model, which was built from the mid to late 2000s, and they made about 250 per metal per year, so you can pretty easily track for about 4.5 years of production how many of these were made. As Brian mentioned, it is a Lemania-based movement, and the same basic movement as the Omega Caliber 321 actually went to the moon. What's interesting about Patek's version is that it's heavily modified, not just the finish. That goes without saying, but technically it's also modified. It gains 5-position adjustment, a Breguet overcoil hairspring, a free-sprung regulator, and the power reserve goes from 48 to 65 hours. So you've still got that glorious column wheel lateral clutch chrono, and being broad, open, and easy to view, it doesn't hide anything the way an automatic or a vertical clutch would. A truly special timepiece and a real connoisseur's and collector's favorite. The 5070 is irreplaceable. True, it's not an in-house movement, but it's glorious for that. And a lot of folks will say that the era of Le Mans chronographs basically took a piece of Patek's soul with it when that era died. I hate to say that.
Who says that?
I do. I'll be honest, a lot of folks are purists. They like the improved older calibers, and a lot of folks miss the JLC 920. They miss the Le Mans 2310. They miss the era when Patek Philippe would take even LeCoultre movements and case them up in their own fashion. There is a Patek Reverso out there, and it is not Patek powered. So that was a glorious era, but an era that is concluded. The other reason a lot of folks prefer the older Le Mans movements and outsourced calibers is because they limited production. There are a lot of 5170s kicking around, and I mean a lot. And Patek's ability to make that movement itself changed the production magnitudes. So if you're a purist and you want some exclusivity, the 5070 is still the way to go.
Okay. I guess it's your turn now.
Yeah, it is. Okay, yellow gold. I didn't think it would be a thing for me.
I mean, look at you, 2 out of the 3.
I'm very Miami today. And I'm wearing my yellow shirt to match. And thematically, you could see this would be a perfect Daytona companion. Yellow gold, it's of course part of the generation that bowed in 2017 at Baselworld when they finally attached an Oyster Flex strap to a Daytona. Now here's the thing about this watch. I actually prefer it to the white gold, and normally I'm a white or gray metal watch guy. I like discretion.
I prefer the white gold.
For me, this is just so handsome that I will deal with the occasional blush at the extravagance of wearing yellow gold. I can live with it because for me the contrast here is more explosive than anything this side of a Paul Newman. This feels like a modern day Paul Newman dial. Red track outboard, red varnished second sand, matte gold sub-registers, yellow gold hands and indices. You got that Cerachrome ceramic bezel, the yellow gold case, the contrast to the black strap. All of that in 40 millimeters, which means it's one of the few watches on our table today that isn't somewhat gigantic. Now you can see it's a good looking piece, and on the strap there's a nice balance to the yellow gold, not just in terms of color contrast, but in terms of offering more of a utilitarian aesthetic alongside the dandy's choice. And you do have to be a bit of a dandy to wear this watch. It's raffish, it's flamboyant, it's brash. Yellow gold and a Daytona is never going to go unnoticed. So while it's not a huge watch, make no mistake, there's no anonymity coming your way. 3-day power reserve, 100 meters water resistant, automatic and loomed, means it's a sports watch through and through. But of course, being only 12.2 millimeters thick, you can fit this one under a cuff. It's got a lot to recommend it. And remember, with the Oyster Flex strap bracelet, and it is a bracelet, there's a metal band that runs through the rubber. So it is a bracelet from side to side. It can never tear, it can never fracture. And altogether, probably the most comfortable option if you are going to wear your Daytona in hot weather because of the bellows system underneath the strap that creates an air pocket and a perfect fit. Real cool watch.
Yeah, so the bellows underneath also allow the watch to stay stable on the top of your wrist as opposed to sliding from side to side. For me, as I said, the white gold variant with the silver dial black subs is possibly one of my favorite Rolexes, and I'd say top 2 and ones that I would currently want to own. It's that watch and the white gold Pepsi with the meteorite dial. I go back and forth between the two, but as you mentioned, really cool watch. The rubber strap itself, I think, is somewhat ingenious in that they didn't just throw on a typical rubber strap. They did it the Rolex way. Ceramic bezel. The Daytona on the croc strap with the metal bezel before this watch came out was languishing, right? It was. The watch was primarily only purchased on the metal bracelet. They then transitioned into the crocodile strap with the ceramic bezel, and you definitely sold an uptick. And then once they moved it to the Oyster Flex, it was lights out, game over. It's one of their most sought after references now, particularly this dial combination.
And it's important to note that before these, the gold Daytonas really had no momentum behind them. They were only slightly more popular than two-tone. And this was the first truly red-hot gold Daytona series in white, rose, and yellow gold. And they remain hot items today, 4 model years later. All right, what you got for me?
So I've been playing with this for the last 10 minutes. You can throw that strap back on because we'll talk about it. So here we have a Hublot Big Bang Unico chrono. For me, Hublot, in regards to this watch, does not get nearly enough love. This is a column wheel lateral clutch chrono. I keep saying chrono.
The chronograph, a new complication for Hublot.
So You have here a black ceramic case, rubber strap that's easily adjustable. To me, one of the most ingenious strap changing systems that's currently going on in the watch business. Super easy to take on and off. Plenty of different straps would look great on this watch. I'll let you talk a little bit more about the history of this movement and its construction. But to me, if you talk to collectors, or shouldn't even necessarily collectors, but those in the know that understand the mechanics of a watch, they would all say that the Hublot Chronograph is one of the best out there.
Yeah, there's no doubt. The movement itself was designed as a bit of a Ferrari, partly because, as we mentioned earlier, there are Ferrari watches and Hublot currently owns the franchise. So what I love about this movement, I'm going to unscrew the crown, is that it was designed to be seen from the front, whereas most movements, and we saw on the Patek, for example, are interesting from the back. The Hublot was designed with the column wheel and the lateral clutch on the front of the movement. So you can actually see the column wheel down at 6 o'clock and the lateral clutch moving into and out of contact with the driving center. All of which is to say, it's like having a display case back on the front of the watch. Now there's a lot to love here because if you're like me and you've become less and less tolerant of scratches and swirls as you've aged as a collector, then ceramic is great for you. First, it's super light. The inner case holding the movement is titanium. The outside is ceramic. And it's a very cool blacked out look without being the incomprehensible all black Hublot aesthetic. There's a lot to love about the movement itself. It does have a display case back and it's worth discussing, but the Unico 1240 series and the 1241 and the 1242, it gives you a silicone escapement that operates unlubricated, a 3-day power reserve. It gives you standard flyback chronograph functionality. And of course, as we noted earlier, all of that fun is visible on the dial side. Now being 100 meters water resistant, it's also an all the time watch. So if you're of a mind to never take it off in the shower, washing the dog, at the beach, the boardroom, or I should say, the sauna room, this is a timepiece that will do it all. As extreme an environment and an experience as you can imagine, I can't think of a better companion than a sports watch movement in a ceramic case with 100 meters or more of resistance. And it really is a fun watch. If you think Hublot is all about image, you have to acknowledge that they've spent the money on the product as well. So while this watch is not for all, it definitely has the features and the functionality to justify luxury status and be a grail for someone.
And sorry to interrupt you, but one of the things that really also struck me when they came out with the watch is that this is an in-house Hublot movement. Exceptionally well made, as I said, but that they are charging far less for this watch than what AP charges for their offshore, which is a non-in-house modular chrono. And I just thought that, again, it was very telling.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. A Richard Mille RM11 is not technically more sophisticated, and unlike Richard Mille, Hublot is making all of its parts and doing all of its engineering. So to be able to get this for, I mean, what, like an eighth of what someone pays for an RM11? This is an incredible watch.
And half of what you're paying for an AP.
If you want something that's totally big, brash, in your face, and unapologetic about it, you're going to want something like this. And because Hublot has spent the money on the engineering and the materials, I actually think it's a remarkably good choice. It's a big watch, but note, I have a tiny wrist. Hublot realizes...
It's a bit smaller than a 45 than the case size.
It does, and Hublot realizes you can make a bigger watch but not a bigger client, so they design these things to fit on human anatomy.
Where do you come up with this stuff?
Again, I'd be unemployed if I didn't. Okay, so where are we now? We got one watch left.
And you're trading in like soybeans or something like that, and probably making more.
Well, I'm trading in gold today. And as you can see, the white gold Duomet chronograph from JLC is probably still my favorite chrono. I owned this watch for 4 years. I lost it after 4 years. Yes, so am I, man. I dream about this thing at night.
That is the tmosso. That's literally the tmosso watch.
That is more tmosso than the watch I currently own.
It's also known, I think, as the tmosso.
Now, the timepiece, of course, is a 42mm white gold chronograph. It too has a Foudroyante. It has 2 mainspring barrels. 42mm, it's actually an alloy cooled gray gold. Rolex uses it, JLC uses it, Patek uses it since 2006. So it's white gold that can't be scratched through and never needs to be plated externally to keep it silver. The dial is matte black, and there is a lot going on. If you look at the center of the watch, there are 2 hands coaxial, one for the chronograph, one for the time. White gold hands tell you the time, rose gold hands tell you the chronograph time. You've got a 1/6 of a second Foudroyante, you've got a minutes hand, an hours hand, and then a scrolling single-digit minutes disc. 2 power reserve indicators at the base of the dial because the watch has 2 separate mainspring barrels. That's as good as it gets.
It's as good as it gets.
That could be a Longa. But note, it's got the two barrels. One drives the chronograph, one tells the time, and that makes sure that you don't lose balance amplitude when the chrono's activated. It also means that activating the chrono doubles the power when you double the power drain, so there's no effect on power reserve. Côte de Soleil sunburst across the bridges, German silver style with nickel copper zinc alloy, with the copper giving it that golden hue. And again, this is a level of finish you're not going to see on any other JLC under $100,000. So being the flagship complication from JLC has its privileges.
When was this watch released?
2010.
Yeah, I mean, you know, to be honest, like, regardless of what JLC is doing now, I just don't think that they're producing watches like this.
No, I mean, hell.
I mean, this when you would see this watch, when this watch came out, you would almost look at that movement, look at the complication, and say, like, why are folks buying anything else?
This is the kind of complication that, say, Grubel Forsey would do.
Correct.
It took JLC to a place in the technical avant-garde that it hadn't been for a long time, and really helped to reestablish the name of JLC after some down years in the 80s and 90s. Real cool piece. Probably the best version of the most important JLC of our era.
Definitely the best version.
Brian, you got to pick one of these watches to be your own. Which one would you pick and why?
Pick one to be my own. I'm probably going with the, well, I'd say if I'll pick three. I've got the Journe, I've got the JLC,
okay,
and I've got the Rolex.
There you go. You got your sports watch, your dress watches, your rare watch.
So I'm a big fan of white metals. Primarily wear white metals. The color scheme of the Journe for me, that sort of grayish black, is just something I would wear all the time. The case size fits me perfectly. I like the esoteric configuration of the subdials. Honestly, it checks every box for me. The JLC, I love the color scheme. I love the color of those hands against the matte black. The complication itself I could stare at all day. And I think that this truly represents like a mechanical marvel. It is when I think that one of the most complicated micro machines of the world, I think about this. And then, the Daytona, the white metal variant is possibly one of my favorite sports watches being made right now. But again, I'm a big fan of this color combination too. They fit my wrist particularly well. I love rubber strap watches. I'm wearing one right now. And yeah, those would be my three.
All right, we didn't do wrist checks because we're wearing watches that you guys have seen and we wanted to cut to the chase. Guys, thanks so much. Remember, tmosso at thewatchbox.com if you see anything here you want to buy or if you'd like to sell us a watch. Thanks so much. I'm Tim, he's Brian. Time out, Tim out. Thanks for logging on.